The cargo ship groaned against the pier, but Eli did not wait for the gangplank to settle. He stepped onto the Oakhaven docks with a single worn leather satchel gripped tight in his hand. Around him, the market was a chaotic blur of shouting merchants and clattering carts, but he did not look at them. He did not look back at the harbor or the ship that brought him here. His eyes were locked on the jagged tree line, where the mountain rose into the clouds. He moved through the crowd like a ghost, his pace steady, his gaze never wavering from the forest edge. Every step took him further from the noise, deeper into the quiet. By noon, the village sounds had faded to a dull hum behind him. He reached the base of the mountain, where a derelict cabin sat half hidden by overgrown brush. The wood was gray and sagging, the windows blind with grime. Eli stopped. He dropped his satchel in the dirt, took a long, slow breath, and finally looked at the structure that would become his entire world. He reached for the door handle, his knuckles white, and pushed. The first week was a war against rot. Eli cleared the debris with a frantic, rhythmic intensity that left no room for rest. He tore out the waterlogged floorboards, his fingers catching on rusted nails and splintered wood. By the third day, his palms were a map of raw, bleeding gashes, but he did not stop. He wiped the blood onto his trousers and reached for the next board. He spent hours in the forest, dragging cedar planks back to the cabin until his shoulders burned and his breath came in ragged gasps. He measured, cut, and hammered, forcing the new wood into place with heavy, deliberate strikes. Each nail driven home was a strike against the silence he had built around himself. When the final plank was set, he sat on the floor, his hands trembling, staring at the solid, level surface he had created from ruin. The cabin no longer groaned under his weight. It stood firm. He stood up, his joints aching, and looked at the space he had reclaimed. He had purged the decay, and in the process, he had begun to bury the man he used to be. With the roof sealed and the floors firm, Eli turned his attention to the earth. He cleared a patch of soil behind the cabin, turning the dirt until his muscles burned and the ground was dark and loose. He planted rows of potatoes and carrots, watching the first green shoots break the surface with a quiet, focused intensity. He did not speak to the villagers who occasionally passed by on the mountain trail. He simply offered a brief nod and returned to his work. One afternoon, a local merchant stopped at the cabin door, gesturing toward the garden. He offered a trade, a bag of flour for a basket of fresh carrots. Eli accepted the exchange without a word, his movements efficient and guarded. The merchant did not ask for his name, and Eli did not offer it. As the sun dipped behind the peaks, Eli retreated to the porch. He pulled his axe from the stump and began to sharpen the blade. The garden was growing, but the axe remained ready, a sharp reminder of the shadows that still lingered just beyond the firelight. Winter arrived with a violent, howling gale that slammed against the mountain. Inside, the cabin rattled. Every window shuddered under the pressure of the wind, and the heavy timber frame groaned as if the mountain itself were trying to tear the structure down. Eli stood by the door, his posture rigid, his ears straining to catch any sound that did not belong to the storm. He felt the familiar, cold urge to check the locks for the second time. He reached toward the pillow where he usually kept a knife, his fingers brushing the fabric. Then, he stopped. His hand hovered, trembling slightly, before he pulled it back. The realization hit him with the force of the wind outside. He no longer needed the steel. He no longer needed the barricades. The storm was just weather, not a pursuit. He walked to the center of the room, his footsteps steady on the floorboards he had laid himself. He blew out the flame, plunging the room into a deep, absolute darkness. The man who had been running was gone. The morning sun cut through the cabin window, hitting his face with a warmth that felt entirely new. Eli blinked, his eyes adjusting to the soft golden light. He sat up, his limbs heavy with the first truly restful sleep he had known in years. He stood, walked to the door, and pushed it open. The cold, crisp air of the mountain rushed in, sharp and clean against his skin. He stepped out onto the porch, looking over the garden he had planted with his own hands. The soil was damp with dew, and the rows of vegetables stood firm against the morning breeze. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the scent of pine and wet earth. He was no longer a man looking over his shoulder, no longer a man running from the ghosts of his past. He stood still. He looked at the mountain peaks, then back at the cabin. The silence of the woods was no longer a threat. It was a sanctuary. He was finally home,